Hi, welcome to my new video about the size of Middle-earth. Today, before we get to the history of Sauron's main fortress, I would like to inform you about a new giveaway event called Discover Middle-earth. To enter this event, all you have to do is to be subscribed to this channel. It does not matter whether you are an old or a new subscriber. And then leave a comment below this video using the hashtags hashtag Discover Middle-earth, hashtag LOTR Rise to War, with an answer to a simple question: where in Middle-earth you would like to live. Once this event concludes, we will draw 2 lucky winners who will receive $40 each. Great thanks to the sponsor of this event, a strategy game, Lord of the Rings Rise to War. Now back to our topic. BARAD-DûR, or Lugburs in the Black Speech of Mordor, was a mighty 4,593 feet or 1,400 meters high, vast fortress, armory, prison, and a furnace of great power built on the plateau of Gorgoroth in northwestern Mordor. It was a place famous for its terror and sheer size. The subjects of the Dark Lord occasionally used names Barad-dûr, Lugburs, or Dark Tower as a metonym for Sauron himself. They understood that their Dark Master and his fortress were inseparable. Nevertheless, the mighty shadow-shrouded stronghold served as a center base of operations for Dark Lord Sauron in Middle-earth in the Second and Third Ages. The name Barad-dûr is Sindarin for Dark Tower. It is a combination of two terms, Barad, which means tower or fortress, and Dur, which stands for dark. Lugburs in the Black Speech of Mordor has the same meaning, from Lug, tower, and Burs, dark. The look of this dark fortress must have been impressive, to say the least. Wall upon wall, battlement upon battlement, black, immeasurably strong, mountain of iron, gates of steel, tower of adamant. This is how it is described. Moreover, it was hidden by a cloud of shadow and darkness at all times. The Dark Tower was built on the end of the southwestern offshoot of the Ash Mountains, a range that started at the Black Gate of Mordor and ran eastward. It rose above the plains of Gorgoroth and stood on the southeastern side of Udun. Just a note here: before the breaking of the world at the end of the First Age, the lands of Mordor, Khand, and Rhûn lay where the inland Sea of Helcar had been, and the Sea of Rhûn and Sea of Nurnen were its remnants. But back to Barad-dûr. The eastern entrance into the tower had a road that went north and then west to Isenmouth. A second route, known as Sauron's Road, ran from the west gate of Barad-dûr through the plains of Gorgoroth and ended in the Chambers of Fire in Mount Doom. The volcanic mountain was not farther than 10 miles from the Dark Tower. When, during the Second Age, Sauron began to stir again, he decided to settle in Mordor, which remained the pivotal of his evil contemplations and also a stronghold in which he decided to build his fortress home. He also created a unique speech to be used as a common language by his servants, the Black Speech, but which became just one of the languages used in Barad-dûr itself. Moreover, the soldiers stationed there used a debased form of the tongue in the end. At the beginning of his quest for power, Sauron, disguised as Anatar, aided the elves in the creation of the Rings of Power in Eregion in Eriador, only to secretly forge the One Ring to rule them all in Orodruin. On the other hand, Sauron had already decided to settle down in Mordor. Therefore, he personally identified a place where he wanted his tower to be constructed. He ordered his servants to build him the fortress like no other in the world at that very spot. But to build such a monstrous structure had not been an easy task. Sauron himself channeled his own power through the newly created One Ring to increase the strength of his new home. As it was strengthened by the power of the One Ring, its foundations would survive as long as the ring existed. Gandalf himself later described the ring as being the foundation of Barad-dûr. In this way, the Maya power of Sauron turned the building material into hard, unbreakable substance. Meanwhile, Sauron set about conquering Middle-earth, launching an attack upon the Elves of Eregion, getting close to final victory, only to be repelled by the men of Númenor. Although he was fighting a war, Sauron was mostly present at the construction site of Barad-dûr, channeling his power into the very heart of his bastion. Despite his direct involvement in the construction, it took 600 years to finish this gargantuan task. At the end, the moat was dug, across which mighty bridge a causeway ran from the steel gate of the tower out into the plain of Gorgoroth. The moat was filled with molten rock, as lava from Mount Doom was channeled back across the plain of Gorgoroth to add a final touch to Barad-dûr's defense system. The newly built fortress was the greatest of its kind since the fall of Angband in the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. As the first lieutenant of the tower, Sauron appointed the second of the Nazgûl, an Easterling called Camil. Under his guidance it was manned, equipped, and the rules for operating were set. Barad-dûr was indeed a vast fortress, and a furnace of high power. Soon after its completion, however, Tar-Minastir of Númenor sent a fleet to Middle-earth, and Sauron's forces were driven out of the western lands that they had roamed at will up to that time. But Barad-dûr could not be approached by the Númenorians yet, and Sauron was able to consolidate his power in Mordor from his new home, and even extend it into the east. It seemed the world would be divided into two spheres of influence, Sauron's in the east and Númenorian in the west. None of those powers was happy with that status quo though, with Sauron constantly harassing the borders, testing the Númenorian will to resist, slowly adding more and more territories to his realm. The Númenorians, meanwhile, decided to react just once, but for all. In the 3rd century of the 4th millennium of the Second Age of the world, the Númenorian king Ar-Pharazôn resolved it was time to challenge Sauron's claim to be the king of men. He gathered his fleet and a vast force of men, landed in Umbar, and set to assault Mordor itself. Sauron wanted to meet the invaders with force, sending his own army to intercept them. But his army crumbled, soldiers deserted, and ran away. No one could face such a might the Númenorians assembled at that time. Seeing his defeat, Sauron refused to log himself in Barad-dûr and test its strength, and rather left his dark tower to meet the mighty King Ar-Pharazôn personally. After being led in front of the Númenorian king, he humbled himself, falling on his knees, and begged for mercy. No one knew that this was a part of his secret plan. As a great judge of human mentality, he rightly assumed Ar-Pharazôn will not execute him, but rather take him prisoner to be shown as a prized trophy. Who from the mortal man could say he has a Maya as a prisoner? Thus he was able to stay close to the king, slowly corrupting the people, preparing the downfall of his greatest enemy from within. All those years of his imprisonment in Númenor, his fortress of Barad-dûr remained in the capable hands of his servant, a black Númenorian from Umbar, later called the Mouth of Sauron, while the Nazgûl were consolidating the power of Mordor over their home regions. Therefore, the Dark Tower stood ready for Dark Lord's return. It took just 51 years to persuade the Númenorians to forsake the Valar and attack Valinor to wrestle immortality from the grip of gods. Because he expected this invasion to be the downfall of his hated enemies, he did not board any of these ships, and rather stayed on their island to watch the destruction of Númenorian power. But he did not assume the reaction of the Valar would be as destructive as it actually was, with the island being torn, drowned, and utterly wiped off the face of the world. Caught in the destruction, Sauron lost his fair mortal body, and only as a shadow was he able to escape and return home to Mordor, to Barad-dûr, where, with the help of his ring, which preserved a great deal of his power, was he able to create himself a new shape. But he could not create a fair form any more, so he shaped himself into a formidable one. It took him nearly 120 years to get back into condition, and finally attack the survivors of the fall of Númenor, who, meanwhile, established the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor in the western lands. But this war did not go as planned for the Dark Lord. The Númenorians were not swept back to sea. Quite the opposite happened. Elendil the Tall, their High King, allied himself with Gil-galad, the King of Elves of Lindon, and together these two created the last alliance of elves and men, mustering the forces of all elven tribes in the west together with the men of Númenorian kingdoms. Their allied army advanced on Mordor to put an end to Sauron's rule forever. In a climatic battle on the Dagorlad, the battle plain, Sauron's forces were destroyed, the Black Gate stormed, and Mordor itself invaded. This time had Sauron no other option than to be besieged in Barad-dûr. The great test of the durability of his fortress began. It stood strong for 7 years, withstanding all assaults. Anarion, the son of Elendil, was killed by the stone thrown from its battlements, among many others. But in the end, the walls were broken, and the vanguard of elves broke into the tower itself. The Nazgûl rallied the defenders to stop them, but failed, and so the Dark Lord himself had to venture out to face his enemies. As an iron-clad giant, he burst into the battle, breaking the siege and escaping to the slopes of Orodruin. There he turned upon his pursuers, killing both Elendil and Gil-galad in single combat. But then Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ruling ring from his finger. With the loss of the source of his shape and form was Sauron scaled down to a mere shadow that escaped east to ruin. Now his tower was taken and destroyed by the victorious forces. Although the tower of Barad-dûr was leveled to the ground, its foundations had been made with the power of the ring and could not be destroyed without destroying the ring itself. The perfect opportunity to do so was wasted though, as Isildur decided not to destroy the One Ring, and against all advice kept it as a compensation for his perished brother and father. The second age of the world ended, with the underground elements of the Dark Tower remaining intact. The fortress waited for the return of its master. Gondor built fortresses at the entrances to Mordor though, to prevent this return, maintaining the watchful peace for over 1,000 years. The mouth of Sauron also survived, and now it was his turn to start rebuilding his command post. In secret, because the watch over Mordor was still vigilant. Then the Great Plague in Gondor caused the fortifications guarding Mordor to be abandoned, and Mordor filled with evil things again. The Ringwraiths, who were not destroyed but escaped the fall of Barad-dûr, had taken advantage of Gondor's decline to re-enter Mordor, took over the empty fortresses, and even conquered Minas Ithil. The Nazgûl had regularly visited the ruins of the Dark Tower during their exile, checking the progress of the rebuild. But nothing changed above the ground or on the outside, till the watch dropped and the guard towers around Mordor were abandoned by Gondorian forces. Then reconstructions began to be visible even by a naked eye, but there was none watching. Only those loyal to the Dark Lord were roaming Mordor land. Meanwhile, Sauron returned, but not to Barad-dûr, but to southern Mirkwood, to his fortress of Dol Guldur, which was already inhabited by his Nazgûl servants for a long time. At the end of the third millennium of the Third Age, the White Council sent their forces to drive Sauron, called then still the Necromancer, out from Mirkwood, and he really withdrew to Mordor, feigning defeat but readying for war. There he ordered the rebuilding of the Dark Tower in earnest. Given that the tower originally took some 600 years to raise, it was surprising to all that its second building was finished in mere decades. That proves beyond doubt that the foundations laid with the power of the ring remained strong and undamaged in Gorgoroth to build upon, and also that the hidden preparation works were running for at least 2 millenniums already. Towers and battlements, tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne above immeasurable pits. Great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant. That's how it looked like again, covered in a constant shadow created by Sauron himself. When finished, it stood rising black, blacker and darker than the vast shades amid which it stood, the cruel pinnacles and the iron crown of the topmost tower. The topmost tower of Barad-dûr have been the place where Sauron now dwelt. At least the window of the eye was located there, the window from which the lidless eye, the form which Sauron decided to take after he had proclaimed himself openly again, stared out across Middle-earth. Like in the Second Age, was Barad-dûr constructed at least as much through the personal power of Sauron as through stone and mortar. During the Dark Lord's search for the missing ruling ring, captured Gollum was brought into the tower. For 11 years was he imprisoned, tortured, and interrogated to reveal the location of the One Ring, as Sauron had recognized that he had once possessed it. Thus Sauron learned that the One Ring had been found. The information from Gollum led to sending forth the Black Riders to search for hobbits, Shire, and Baggins. Satisfied that he had learned all he could from the creature, Sauron no longer had a reason to hold Gollum, and allowed him to be released. He knew quite well that Gollum would continue his search for the ring right away, and thus bring the spies following him to the ultimate treasure. Sauron resided in his dark fortress well till the end, never leaving it again. But however strong the fortress seemed to be, its walls smooth and hard as adamant, the fortress could not stand without the ring's power to hold it together. Therefore, when the One Ring was destroyed in Orodruin's volcanic heart by Frodo Baggins, with the unwitting aid of Gollum, the power that kept it together was lost. Barad-dûr collapsed into ruin and was destroyed forever, never to be rebuilt again. This ultimate defeat of Sauron ended the Third Age of Middle-earth. Gorgoroth became empty as its orcs fled or were killed, while the land of Nurn was given to the freed slaves of Sauron to be their own to farm and to rule it as they wished. If you like the video, please give it a thumb up and consider subscribing if you are not already, as each takes just a second to do and will be very much appreciated. And for those willing to go the extra mile, the Buy Me a Coffee link is in the description below. Thank you everybody. See you next time.